Hi folks, I'm Bethany Benz Whittington, a PCUSA pastor and teacher, and one of my favorite things to do with my theological education is taking what I know and applying it to everyday life. So that's what I'm doing here, kind of like a sermon, but I will say things that your pastor probably can't, which would be great fodder for discussion, I hope. So this is our current events for August the 23rd, 2023. Today we're talking about natural disasters, or in what I like to call nerd speak, theodicy. It's basically the question of why bad things happen if God is all good and all powerful. Now, I said before that I love taking what I know and applying it to everyday life, right? And in most cases, that's true. But with theodicy, there's really not much knowing because no theologian has a really complete or satisfactory answer to the question of why bad things happen if God is all good and all powerful. So generally, we go around in circles trying to justify this thing or that thing and cast blame, or we're sniffing out unrighteousness and we're landing nowhere. So, if we land nowhere today, I'm really sorry. This is one of the great mysteries of faith. The current event bringing us this quagmire of theological discourse is, of course, the fires in Maui, in Washington, in Canada, in Greece, in Spain. It's a lot. So we're going to talk about this in conjunction with the story of Abraham invoking the righteous people of Sodom to God. It's an interesting story, and I want you to go read it before we go on to the rest of the video. So pause here, read together Genesis 18:16 through 33, and then come back. Okay, let's jump in. I like using this passage to talk about theodicy because it's got this wonderful dialogue between Abraham and God. And we've already learned that Sodom has sinned gravely and that someone has cried out in anguish over the sins of Sodom. We don't know specifically what those sins are, but they seem grave enough for God to take notice. And then God sends this recon team just to check. And then God wonders, should I even tell Abraham about this? He did argue with me that one time about Hagar and Ishmael. But God decides that Abraham should know because God has charged Abraham with the building up of righteous nations. And so they must understand that the righteousness bit really is important. And Abraham has questions. I love this. There are so many great examples of the Hebrew people going toe-to-toe with God, most notably Job, right? But Abraham is no slouch in this department either. He is demanding that God remain faithful to the covenant that God made after the flood, and then another between God and Abraham. So Abraham knows what he's talking about. So he bargains with God all the way down to if there are 10 righteous people, you spare Sodom. And God says, you know what? Sure. Now, this is what it means to be true to the covenant. It's not always about doing exactly right without provocation, always knowing exactly what's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's about being held accountable as well. And Abraham is absolutely holding God accountable here. He's saying, remember you said never again. So what are you doing? So this story came up for me in seminary when I was working on a paper. Remember Hurricane Maria that ravaged Haiti? I was doing a group project and we were doing theodicy about that particular event, and one of my group members invoked this story. He said, surely there was one righteous person in Haiti. And I, in my overly confident, I've been in seminary a year longer than you voice, responded, no one is righteous. Now, if you'd like to stop here and pretend that you don't know me, that's cool, because that's kind of what he did. But in my defense, I had been in seminary a year longer than him, and I had taken theology, and I knew what John Calvin and the Reformers had to say about righteousness and total depravity. I could have been chiller about it, but one thing about me is I have no chill. So let's talk briefly about total depravity. It's the notion that we are all humans, totally and completely depraved, all of us tainted by sin. Therefore, none of us can earn our way into heaven. That's why it's so significant that grace is a free gift as opposed to something that we have to earn, because none of us can earn it. So I threw my knowledge of total depravity at him and derailed us a bit, kind of like I've done here. The point, though, is Abraham was arguing for the righteous people of Sodom, and God knew there were none. And Abraham persisted, because that's what we do. We are not God. We are, however, God's creation. And really, as we see here from Abraham and the whole message of Jesus, is that we should be for each other. That's the whole reason that God is angry with the Sodomites, because in some way or another, they have acted against each other. And Abraham shows us a different way. Abraham advocates for God's creation, for God's people. Abraham says to God, "Remember the covenant," and God responds. That is the bit that should be instructive to us. We've heard from so many grief-stricken people coming out of these places filled with fire, and then this week we heard from President Biden in Maui, and he said, "We grieve with you. We are with you." He didn't attempt to place blame or to say, "Don't be upset," or "Don't worry." He just heard the cries and said, "I hear you." And this is really the crux of it. It's fine that the residents of Maui and Lahaina specifically, that the people in Greece or in Spain, it is fine with them to be angry with God and to cry out and say, "Why, God?" and to scream and fight. Fine. Our job as the people on the outside, as their fellow creation, is to be on their side. Our job is to hold that space for them to ask those questions and reveal that anger. No judgment, no shame. And our job is to be for them, to advocate for them, to tell God and the president and the federal government to step it up. This is why I do these current events things, because being for each other is about so much more than just yelling at God when things go badly. It's about learning that God is calling us to be for each other in practical, tangible ways. We can join the Hawaiians and the Greeks and the Spaniards in their cries of anguish to God, and we can use our resources, our power, our connections, our voices to influence the system to help. Being faithful is about so much more than just Sunday morning worshiping God. It is equally as much about calling the powers and principalities of this world to account, about being for each other and living every day as imitators of Jesus Christ. It's about being deep and wide. So you have a discussion guide linked in the description of this video. Use that. Go a bit deeper on ways to help Lahaina specifically, Greek Spain, or people more broadly, generally in your area. Say some prayers of anger or lament or frustration or whatever you're feeling, and then together set to work being for each other. And I'll see you next time.